Still silent? God, you make this too easy. I heard Lauren's voice slice through the courtroom air. Sharp, mocking, the kind of laugh that settles into your chest and refuses to leave. I sat there, hands folded, a straight-backed posture that made no motion to respond. No facial flicker, nothing but quiet. Around me, the polished oak benches gleamed under the overhead lights, the murmurs of observers weaving into a background hum that seemed almost gentle compared to the jab of her words. I let her laugh roll over me. Every inch of me wanted to correct, to argue, to defend, to shift in my seat, to even clear my throat, but I did not. Years of learning the language of patience had trained me to understand that silence could carry more weight than words, that observation could outlive confrontation, that what appears passive can be deliberate. My eyes scanned the courtroom methodically, catching the shimmer of sunlight bouncing off a brass hinge, the glint of a gold nameplate identifying Judge Evelyn Monroe, the straight lines of her robe, the faint tilt of her head as she observed the exchange, alert yet neutral, the kind of neutrality that would weigh heavily on any testimony, the kind that would decide the truth. The USB sat on the edge of the wooden table before me, innocuous in its simplicity, yet inside it held every piece of the story Lauren believed she had orchestrated perfectly. I could feel the quiet pulse of strategy, the slow, deliberate rhythm of planning that had brought me to this precise moment. I was Matthew Carter, 42, a structural engineer who had spent his life building bridges, not to be poetic, but to be precise, and that same precision now anchored my decisions here. My silence was not weakness. It was a calculated stillness, a preparation, a watchful pause that would soon speak louder than any shout or protest. Lauren, in her emerald dress, leaned forward slightly, the motion barely perceptible, yet I saw it, registering her expectation, her confidence, the air of someone who believed the narrative had been crafted entirely in her favor. Around the room, friends and family glanced, shifting uneasily, sensing the tension but not understanding its direction, the quiet before the storm that they could not yet see. The echoes of her laughter lingered, and I let them linger, letting the room absorb the sound, the mockery, the misplaced triumph, because in those echoes lay the truth, compressed, waiting for the proper release. I took a measured breath, not as a release, but as a steadying of the mind, a slow intake to calibrate, to prepare for the moment when the silence would transform into evidence, when the quiet I had cultivated over decades would unfold into a narrative undeniable in its clarity. My eyes did not waver from the USB. I imagined the circuit of light, the reflection in the metal casing, the small weight that contained the orchestration of honesty, the voice of Lauren captured in an unguarded moment, every inflection, every confidence, every self-assured jab. This was the hinge on which the remainder of the afternoon would pivot. Around me, the subtle shifts in posture, the clearing of throats, the shuffle of papers, the faint scratch of pen on legal pad created a rhythmic backdrop that emphasized the magnitude of restraint. I felt no hurry, no adrenaline-driven push. Instead, a controlled awareness, a calm readiness. The court clock ticked imperceptibly, marking time in seconds that felt both suspended and elongated. Every observer, every whisper, every footstep on polished floorboards passed unnoticed by me because my focus was anchored, locked to the knowledge that what was about to unfold would eclipse all prior narratives. Lauren straightened, adjusting a strand of hair, smiling that practiced, confident smile, unknowing that it would betray her just as much as any words she could ever muster. I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders ease, a minuscule gesture signaling nothing, yet reinforcing everything. The judge's pen tapped faintly against the desk, a rhythmic punctuation, and I knew that in minutes the room would transform, the laughter of mockery replaced by the undeniable clarity of truth. I did not flinch. I did not react. I simply waited, letting the moment build, letting her confidence tighten like a cord ready to snap, knowing that the silence I maintained was not empty, that it carried the weight of intention, preparation, and an inevitability she could not foresee. Outside, the sun cast a golden hue through the tall windows, spilling across the hardwood, illuminating dust motes like tiny suspended witnesses to the moment. Inside, I sat, hands resting lightly atop one another, The USB within arm's reach, the calm before the pivotal revelation. And I allowed the room, the people, and even Lauren herself to linger in their misunderstanding of the quiet. Because soon the court would hear her own voice. And in that listening, her triumph would unravel, her mockery rendered powerless by the very evidence she could not anticipate. Before that afternoon in court, most people thought they knew what kind of man I was. Quiet, predictable, useful. The kind of husband who remembered to change the furnace filter, paid the mortgage before the grace period ended, kept the gas tank above half, and never made a scene in public. I was 42 years old, born in Columbus, Ohio, raised by a father who believed a man's word should be measured by what he built, not how loudly he spoke. That idea settled into me early. I carried it into my work as a structural engineer, where noise never impressed me. Steel did. Load calculations did. Foundations did. You could paint over weak framing, hang expensive lights, put marble on the counter, and still watch the whole thing fail if the support underneath was wrong. For most of my marriage, I thought Lauren and I had support underneath us. I met her when I was 31, at a charity fundraiser downtown, one of those hotel ballroom events with chicken dinners, silent auction baskets, and people pretending paper name tags made networking feel less awkward. She was standing near the coffee station, laughing at something a coworker said, blonde hair pinned back, blue eyes bright, wearing a navy dress that looked simple until you noticed how every head turned when she moved. She sold residential real estate then, starter homes and modest condos, driving across the city in a used white Camry with a cracked taillight and a trunk full of open house signs. I was the man in a gray suit who accidentally spilled coffee on the edge of her brochure table. She teased me for being too serious while helping me wipe it up, and I remember thinking her smile made the room feel warmer than it had any right to feel. Back then, she liked that I was steady. She said it more than once. She said I made her feel safe. She said other men tried too hard to fill every room, but I made space for people to breathe. I believed her because I wanted to, and because in the beginning, she meant it. We built a normal American life, the kind that does not look dramatic from the outside but takes 1,000 quiet decisions to maintain. A 3-bedroom house in Westerville with a maple tree in the front yard. A 2-car garage that usually held 1 car and too many storage bins. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market. Sunday evenings with laundry humming and pasta sauce simmering on the stove. I kept a small workbench in the garage, not because I needed another project, but because fixing things settled my mind. Lauren used to sit on an old stool out there with a glass of iced tea while I replaced cabinet hinges or sanded a bookshelf, telling me about strange clients and overpriced kitchens and the way people could walk into a house and pretend square footage would solve loneliness. She was sharp then, funny, restless in a way that felt full of hope instead of hunger. When she got promoted, I was proud. When she changed firms, I celebrated. When she started selling 7-figure homes north of the city, I told everyone who would listen that my wife had earned every inch of it. I did not notice the first crack because cracks do not announce themselves. They hide under paint. They wait behind trim. They show up as one sentence said with a smile. At first, Lauren would make little jokes when we were with her new coworkers, calling me her quiet engineer, her human spreadsheet, her calm little Midwestern monk. People laughed, and I laughed too, because marriage teaches you to give grace to the person you love. Then the jokes sharpened. My calm became boring. My patience became weakness. My refusal to argue in front of strangers became proof that I had no fire. I remember one dinner at a steakhouse downtown, where the bill for 4 people was almost $200 before dessert. Lauren sat beside me in a cream blazer, glowing under soft lights, surrounded by agents who spoke in commissions and luxury listings. Someone asked me what I did, and before I could answer, she waved her hand and said, "Matthew makes sure buildings do not fall down and conversations do not get interesting." The table laughed. I looked at my water glass and watched the ice shift. It was a small thing, I told myself. A harmless line. But later, driving home under the yellow glow of Interstate 71, she stared out the passenger window and said, "You could have played along, you know." I said I thought I did. She gave a quiet laugh, not warm this time, not kind. "That is the problem, Matthew. You always think doing nothing is the same as doing something." I kept both hands on the wheel, the speedometer steady at 65 miles per hour, and I let the road noise fill the car. That was how I handled discomfort. I made room for it. I gave it air. I assumed it would pass. I did not understand, yet that Lauren was not waiting for me to speak. She was learning how to use my silence against me. Lauren's transformation was not sudden, and that made it easier to excuse. People imagine betrayal as a door slamming in the middle of the night, but most of the time it is quieter than that. It is a tone that changes by 1 degree, a smile that stops reaching the eyes, a chair pulled a few inches farther from yours at dinner. By the time you notice the distance, you have already been living inside it. After Lauren moved to Hawthorne Premier Realty, everything around her became sharper. Sharper clothes, sharper friends, sharper opinions about what a successful life was supposed to look like. She traded her old Camry for a black Lexus with leather seats and a monthly payment that made my eyebrows lift, but I did not criticize her. She had worked hard. She had earned the right to enjoy herself. That was what I told myself while she stood in our closet, holding 2 dresses against her body, asking which one looked more expensive instead of which one looked better. Her new circle had a language I never learned. They talked about private schools even if they had no children, lake houses even if they hated fishing, bourbon collections, golf memberships, kitchen islands the size of my first apartment. At first, Lauren would come home from those events and roll her eyes with me. Then she stopped rolling her eyes. Then she started repeating them. Matthew, you have to understand, presentation matters. Matthew, people judge what you drive. Matthew, you cannot show up in the same sport coat forever. I would look down at my old Navy jacket, the one I wore to weddings, funerals, and work dinners, and say it still fit. She would smile like I had missed the point so badly it was not worth explaining. The house changed next. The warm beige walls she once loved became embarrassing. The maple cabinets became dated. The garage workbench became an eyesore, even though it sat behind a closed door. She hired a designer named Preston who wore white sneakers that cost more than my first toolbox and used words like flow, energy, and elevated. I came home one Thursday evening to find paint samples taped across the living room wall and Lauren standing in the center of the room with her arms folded, studying our home like it had personally disappointed her. I asked what was wrong with the color we had. She said, nothing, if we want the house to keep looking like a substitute teacher lives here. Preston laughed a little too quickly, then pretended to check his phone. I looked at Lauren, waiting for the part where she softened the joke, where she touched my arm and said she was kidding. She did not. So I nodded, set my laptop bag by the stairs, and went into the kitchen to heat leftovers. That was becoming my role, the man who quietly absorbed the little humiliations so the evening could continue. The strange thing was that Lauren did not seem angrier when I stayed calm. She seemed offended by it. My restraint irritated her. My refusal to match her tone made her push harder, as if she needed proof that I was the problem she had started describing to other people. Her friends changed how they looked at me too. Ashley Grant was the first one I noticed. She and Lauren had met at a luxury listing seminar in Cleveland, and within 6 months, Ashley was at our house almost every weekend, barefoot on our couch, sipping sparkling water, speaking about relationships like she had discovered a secret code the rest of us were too slow to read. She was divorced, confident, and always smiling in a way that made her comments sound lighter than they were. One Saturday afternoon, while I was tightening the loose handle on the patio door, Ashley watched from the kitchen island and said, "You are lucky, Lauren. He is like maintenance with a wedding ring." Lauren laughed into her glass. Not a nervous laugh. Not a polite one. A real laugh. I kept turning the screwdriver, the metal clicking softly against the screw head. I remember the smell of lemon cleaner, the sound of ice settling in Ashley's glass, and the late afternoon sun cutting through the blinds in clean golden lines. I remember thinking that a man can survive a stranger's disrespect. What hollows him out is hearing his wife enjoy it. That evening, after Ashley left, I asked Lauren if she thought the joke had gone too far. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply asked. She stood at the sink, rinsing a wine glass, and looked at my reflection in the dark window. "Matthew," she said, "you make everything sound like a performance review." I told her I was only trying to explain how it felt. She set the glass in the dishwasher harder than necessary and turned around. Maybe that is the issue. Maybe I am tired of managing how quiet men feel. The sentence stayed in the room after she walked away. I stood there beside the counter, listening to the dishwasher hum. And for the first time in our marriage, I understood that Lauren was not just frustrated with my silence. She had started to despise the part of me she once claimed to love. The tension built quietly over months, each evening another measure of subtle imbalance. Lauren began to schedule more social engagements that excluded me, claiming it was networking or dinner with colleagues, while her casual remarks carried a hidden sting. Matthew does not need to come. He is fine being quiet. I observed without comment, noticing how her tone altered around friends, how she allowed jokes to land that would have previously been tempered with a smile or a glance. She would point out flaws in the house, the placement of furniture, even the way I loaded the dishwasher, all under the guise of playful critique. What I had once considered minor annoyances became a repeated pattern, a rhythm of undermining, and I began to catalog these moments silently, as one catalogs storm clouds before they gather. I paid attention to the way she moved through our home, the slight pause at the threshold of the kitchen, the lifted eyebrow at the edge of a chair, the way she gestured with her hands while recounting a story about a colleague, implying I would never understand the significance. It was not overt, and that was precisely what made it effective. I recorded these impressions in the folds of my memory, noting the accumulation of subtle humiliations, the calculated way she deployed them to test my reactions. Every interaction became an observation, every comment a data point. One evening, she hosted a small gathering for her friends from work. I remained in the background, seated at the dining table, engaging minimally, allowing her to dominate the conversation. Her laughter at my lack of input was louder than I expected, the inflection designed to emphasize her control. She made casual remarks about my temperament, my career, my hobbies, framing them as affectionate teasing, yet they carried an unmistakable edge. I listened, noting every syllable, every pause, the way her words were structured to provoke subtle embarrassment, to make her dominance in social settings evident. I did not respond with defensiveness or anger. My stillness acted as a mirror, reflecting her actions without offering justification or explanation, a strategy in itself. The pattern escalated over time, with Lauren's confidence in her ability to provoke me growing with each successful attempt. I remained consistent in my quiet observation, allowing the dynamics to unfold, understanding that revealing my awareness too soon would diminish the impact of the eventual confrontation. Nights became a period of reflection. I replayed conversations, recalling tone, context, and the precise phrasing of her remarks. Each memory was stored carefully, a map of intent and behavior, to be referenced when the time was right. I developed an understanding of her methods, seeing patterns in the way she used social gatherings, private remarks, and casual jokes to assert superiority, each instance adding to a cumulative effect that shaped my perception of our marriage. I began to prepare myself mentally, cultivating patience and a measured response, knowing that immediate reactions would provide her with the power she sought. Silence, once a passive state, became an active tool, a deliberate form of resistance and observation. In the quiet of our home, while she prepared for social events or reflected on her day, I engaged in my own meticulous preparation, reviewing communications, schedules, and interactions, noting inconsistencies and patterns that would later be invaluable. The accumulation of these subtle provocations, cataloged over months, became the foundation of a strategy rooted in careful observation and restraint. I understood the significance of timing and the necessity of patience. Every remark she made, every social maneuver she executed, was a piece of a larger puzzle. I positioned myself as a silent observer, absorbing the provocations, letting them settle, understanding that the power of my eventual action would be proportional to the thoroughness of my awareness. By maintaining this disciplined observation, I cultivated a space where my response could be precise, targeted, and effective, rather than reactive or emotional. The months of quiet attentiveness created a reservoir of knowledge, each interaction adding depth to my understanding of Lauren's methods and intentions. I learned to read the subtle cues, the minor inflections in her voice, the slight alterations in expression, the body language that accompanied statements designed to unsettle me. These lessons, repeated and reinforced daily, allowed me to anticipate her moves, understand her patterns, and prepare for the moment when the context would demand decisive action. In this period, the marriage became a study in contrasts. her outward confidence and my internal calculation, her social performance and my private preparation. The dynamic was delicate, requiring precision and timing. I maintained composure, never betraying the accumulation of understanding building quietly beneath the surface, knowing that restraint, consistency, and strategic patience were essential to transforming the quiet endurance into actionable insight when the opportunity to act arrived. The night the recording was made felt ordinary until it was not. I returned home earlier than expected, the air crisp from the open windows in the late summer evening. The scent of freshly cut grass lingered in the backyard, blending with the faint aroma of dinner that had cooled on the stove. Lauren was in the kitchen with Ashley, laughing in a way that carried an edge I had learned to recognize. I paused at the threshold, letting the soft hum of conversation fill my awareness, noting the rise and fall of their voices, the cadence, the subtle inflections that suggested amusement with a purpose. I did not step forward. I did not interrupt. I placed the small recording device discreetly on the counter and pressed record. Every word they spoke, every chuckle, every half-finished sentence was captured. Lauren spoke freely, assuming my absence rendered her comments safe, unaware that each phrase she articulated was a piece of evidence. She described scenarios with colleagues, plans to portray me in a certain light, casual dismissals of my reactions, all while maintaining the tone of a harmless conversation. Ashley added her observations, unintentionally corroborating Lauren's assertions, as she praised her friend's strategic social maneuvering. I stood silently, listening, cataloging, understanding that patience would be necessary to turn this ordinary domestic scene into something consequential. I knew that in capturing this exchange, the context of months of subtle undermining would crystallize, showing a pattern of behavior rather than isolated incidents. The faint ticking of the kitchen clock measured the passage of time as I observed their expressions, gestures, and emphases. Each nuance became part of a larger picture, each inflection a testament to their intent, their assumptions, and the misjudgment of my quiet demeanor. After the conversation concluded, I stepped back, retrieved the device, and stored it safely, recognizing that the ordinary setting had provided extraordinary clarity. Over the following days, I reviewed the recording, noting the precise moments that highlighted repeated patterns of manipulation and mockery. I cross-referenced these moments with other interactions, messages, and observations, creating a comprehensive understanding of the situation. I began to see how silence could serve as a tool, allowing for observation without engagement, turning passive endurance into strategic foresight. In those moments of reflection, I realized that the recording would serve as more than a document. It would be a narrative, a way to present truth unaltered by interpretation or argument. I prepared notes, aligning timestamps with specific statements, ensuring clarity and context, knowing that when the moment arrived to present the evidence, its impact would rely on the meticulousness of preparation rather than dramatic gestures. I continued my routine with the same outward calm, maintaining the rhythm of daily life, cooking, organizing, and completing tasks while internally mapping the accumulation of information. Each casual interaction, each minor disagreement, each subtle provocation was now part of a structured body of evidence, collected with intention and patience. The quiet of my home became a space for analysis, reflection, and planning, transforming ordinary domestic sounds into a framework for understanding and eventual resolution. In this controlled environment, I could observe the unfolding of intent, measure its effect, and anticipate the implications of disclosure. By the time the court date approached, I had not only the recording but the full comprehension of its context, the ability to narrate its significance without embellishment, and the calm that comes from knowing the truth is self-evident when presented clearly. The patience, the observation, and the careful documentation had all prepared me to move from a silent witness to an active participant, ensuring that when the recording was finally heard, the ordinary domestic scene of that summer evening would reveal the reality of intent, strategy, and the underestimated consequence of my quiet presence. Once the recording was secured, I approached the preparation of presenting it with the same meticulous attention I had applied to my engineering projects. I created a timeline of events, mapping each moment of subtle provocation and mockery to a precise point in the audio. I noted the inflections, the laughter, the pauses, the emphasis Lauren placed on certain words, and aligned them with the social gatherings, dinner conversations, and casual remarks I had previously cataloged. Each entry was cross-referenced with emails, text messages, and appointments to provide context, establishing a clear narrative that would demonstrate consistency of intent rather than isolated incidents. I met with Rebecca Hayes, my attorney, in her office one afternoon, the sun cutting across the blinds in long, sharp lines that illuminated the dust motes like floating witnesses. We went over the recording repeatedly, discussing strategy, ensuring that the presentation would maintain clarity, and that the court would perceive the evidence exactly as it had unfolded in reality. We rehearsed the sequence, not for drama but for precision, deciding the points at which the recording would be introduced, the moments that required highlighting, and the pacing to allow the content to resonate without manipulation. The preparation itself was a quiet exercise in patience and control. I continued my daily routines as if nothing had changed, cooking, cleaning, paying bills, and maintaining our home, while internally running through the details, anticipating objections, planning responses, and reinforcing my composure. Each morning, I walked through the house with the same calm steps, noting the sunlight hitting the countertops, the faint scent of coffee in the air, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and allowing these ordinary details to center me. I practiced delivering concise statements, ensuring that my voice could convey calm authority, clarity, and factual emphasis when necessary. The recording remained a private testament to months of observation and discipline, a tool of truth, a reflection of intent, and a chronicle of patterns that had been invisible to anyone who judged by superficial appearances. In parallel, I reviewed other supporting documents, calendars marked with her social events, invoices for high-end items she acquired, and the subtle but telling changes in our household routines. I cataloged everything meticulously, noting not only what had happened but how it had been perceived, preparing to present a coherent narrative that the court could follow easily. I anticipated the flow of cross-examination, predicting points where her statements might diverge from the documented evidence, and ensured that my notes contained corroborating material to clarify any ambiguities. The process was quiet but intensive, a blend of observation, reflection, and strategic preparation. Over several weeks, I refined the sequence of presentation, ensuring that the moments of subtle humiliation, the contextual background, and the ultimate revelations were communicated in a manner that highlighted both accuracy and the understated power of careful observation. Each night, I reviewed the audio and my notes in the stillness of our home, listening, analyzing, and confirming that every phrase was clear, every laugh accurately time-stamped, every nuance captured. I allowed myself the satisfaction of quiet confidence, knowing that the preparation had been thorough, deliberate, and methodical, leaving nothing to chance. By the time the court date arrived, I was not merely presenting a recording. I was presenting a comprehensive chronicle of behavior, a timeline of events, a pattern of intent, and a narrative structured with precision and clarity. The ordinary domestic setting, once filled with minor irritations and subtle provocations, had been transformed through careful observation and documentation into a compelling and indisputable account. I understood that the true power of the evidence was in its context, in the careful alignment of moments, in the consistency of behavior over time, and in the calm, deliberate presentation of the facts. In that preparation, I found a quiet assurance that when the court heard the recording, the truth, meticulously observed and patiently preserved, would speak for itself, and that the months of patience, careful listening, and disciplined observation had culminated in an unassailable moment of clarity. The morning of the hearing arrived with the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel important. I woke before the alarm, lying still in the gray light of our guest room, listening to the furnace click on and the faint rush of warm air moving through the vents. Lauren and I had been living under the same roof, but in separate worlds for weeks. She had taken the primary bedroom after declaring that she needed emotional space, a phrase that sounded reasonable until I realized it mostly meant she wanted control over the house and the story attached to it. I dressed slowly, choosing a charcoal suit, a white shirt, and the same navy tie I had worn to my father's retirement dinner years earlier. It was not expensive, but it was steady, and that felt right. Downstairs, the kitchen looked staged, the counters spotless, the coffee maker silent. One of Lauren's real estate folders sitting open beside a stack of legal papers she had made sure I would notice. I did not touch them. I poured coffee into a travel mug, checked the small envelope in my briefcase, and made sure the USB was exactly where Rebecca had told me to keep it. Lauren came down 20 minutes later in a pale blue dress and a cream coat, her hair smooth, her makeup soft enough to suggest sadness without looking theatrical. She had prepared for court the way she prepared for a listing presentation, every detail chosen to communicate value, innocence, and control. She saw me standing by the sink and gave a tired little smile, as though we were two neighbors about to discuss property lines. "I hope you do the right thing today," she said. Her voice was gentle, almost kind, and that was what made it colder. I asked what she meant. She slipped her phone into her purse and said, "Do not embarrass yourself trying to fight something everyone can already see." Then she walked past me, leaving the scent of expensive perfume hanging in the kitchen like a signature. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, the black Lexus gliding down our quiet Westerville street, past the maple tree, past the mailbox I had repaired twice, past the life we had once promised to protect. I waited 5 minutes before leaving, not because I needed distance, but because I wanted one last moment in that house without performance in it. The drive to the courthouse took 28 minutes. Interstate 270 was slow near the exit, brake lights glowing red under a washed-out Ohio sky. I remember the ordinary details because ordinary details hold a man together when the rest of his life is being rearranged by strangers in suits. A landscaping truck rattled beside me. A woman in a silver minivan sang along to a song I could not hear. A billboard advertised injury lawyers with the confidence of people who knew pain had a market. When I reached the courthouse parking lot, Rebecca was already there, standing beside her dark sedan with a leather folder tucked under one arm. She did not waste words. She looked at my face, then at the briefcase in my hand, and asked, "Are you ready to let the facts do the talking?" I nodded. She said, "Good. Remember, she wants you emotional. She wants the room to see the version of you she described. Do not give her a stranger to point at. Give them Matthew Carter." We walked inside together beneath the stone columns, through security, past the metal detector, past families whispering in corners, and attorneys moving briskly with files pressed to their chests. The courthouse smelled like floor polish, paper, and old decisions. Every hallway carried an echo, footsteps overlapping with murmurs, doors opening and closing, lives being divided into motions, exhibits, and orders. Lauren was already seated when we entered the courtroom. Ashley sat behind her, eyes fixed on her lap. Daniel Pierce, Lauren's attorney, leaned close to her, speaking in a low, confident voice. He was polished in the way some attorneys are polished, silver hair, clean cuffs, a pen worth more than my first power drill. When Lauren saw me, her expression softened for the room, but her eyes did not. She gave me the smallest nod, not greeting me so much as measuring whether I looked nervous. I sat beside Rebecca and placed my hands on the table. The USB stayed in the envelope. The hearing began with procedural language, dates, filings, income disclosures, temporary arrangements, the dry architecture of a marriage being dismantled. Then Daniel stood. His voice was smooth, careful, sympathetic. He painted Lauren as a woman trapped inside a home where silence had become pressure, where my refusal to argue had made her feel invisible, where my calm had supposedly been a wall built to punish her. He said I controlled the atmosphere by withholding emotion. He said I made ordinary disagreements impossible because I would simply shut down. Lauren lowered her eyes at the right moments. Once, she pressed a tissue beneath one eye. I watched the performance with the strange stillness of a man looking at a house he already knows has termites behind the drywall. Then Daniel turned slightly toward me and said, "Mr. Carter's silence today is consistent with the pattern my client has endured for years." Lauren's mouth curved almost too quickly, a flash of satisfaction she could not fully hide. The room was listening. The story was taking shape exactly as she had planned. Rebecca made a note on her legal pad, calm as a surgeon washing her hands. I felt Lauren glance at me, waiting for the flinch, the objection, the heat in my face. I gave her nothing. Not because I had nothing, because the moment had not arrived yet. Rebecca waited until Daniel finished his careful portrait of me, waited until the last sympathetic word had settled over the room, then stood with the kind of calm that made people instinctively listen. She did not object with volume. She did not accuse Lauren of lying. She simply adjusted her glasses, looked toward Judge Evelyn Monroe, and said, "Your Honor, before my client is characterized any further by interpretation, we ask permission to introduce an audio recording relevant to the claims just made." The room shifted, not loudly. Courtrooms do not gasp the way movies pretend they do. They tighten. Shoulders rise. Pens stop moving. People look from one table to the other, searching faces for answers before the evidence gives them any. Daniel Pierce was on his feet almost immediately, his silver hair catching the overhead light as he argued about context, foundation, and surprise. Rebecca was ready. She had the disclosure receipt. She had the date it had been provided. She had the transcript prepared for the court and opposing counsel. She had every procedural brick stacked exactly where it needed to be. Judge Monroe reviewed the document, her expression unreadable, then looked over the top of her glasses. "Mr. Pierce, the recording was disclosed. I will allow it for limited purposes, subject to wait." Limited purposes. Subject to wait. Dry words, legal words, but to me they sounded like a door unlocking. Rebecca turned to me. I opened the envelope and handed her the USB. It was smaller than my thumb, black plastic with a silver edge, the kind of thing someone might use for vacation photos or tax returns. Lauren stared at it, and for the first time that morning, something moved behind her eyes that was not rehearsed. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The first math of consequence. The courtroom clerk connected the drive. A speaker on the bench gave a faint pop. Rebecca did not look at Lauren. She looked at the judge. This recording was made in the Carter residence on the evening of August 17th, after my client returned home early from work. The voices are Lauren Carter and Ashley Grant. We are prepared to authenticate through testimony and supporting timeline evidence. Then the room filled with the sound of my kitchen. Not an abstract kitchen. My kitchen. The low hum of the refrigerator. The faint clink of glass on granite. Ashley's laugh, bright and careless. Lauren's voice came through clear enough to make my hands feel cold, even though I had heard it dozens of times. "He will not fight it," Lauren said. "That is the whole point. Matthew does not fight anything." Ashley laughed and said, "That actually helps you, though." Lauren answered, "Exactly. If I say he is cold, he just sits there looking cold. If I say he makes me feel alone, he looks like the kind of man who would." I kept my eyes on the table. I did not need to look around to know the room had changed. Silence is different when it is empty and when it is full. This one was full. Full of people recalculating. Full of a judge listening. Full of Lauren hearing her private confidence become public fact. The recording continued. Ashley asked whether I had ever actually threatened her, and Lauren made a small dismissive sound. "No, not like that. He is too controlled for that. But controlled looks bad if you describe it right. You just have to make the quiet feel intentional." Daniel's pen stopped moving. Lauren's tissue froze halfway to her cheek. The words did not sound dramatic in the way a shouted confession might. They were worse because they sounded casual. Practical. Spoken by someone organizing a plan over sparkling water at a kitchen island. Then came the part one had never been able to forget. Ashley asked, "What if he finally speaks up?" Lauren laughed, soft and certain. "Matthew? Please. He would rather swallow glass than embarrass me in public. He is too worried about looking decent. That is his weakness. My silence. My decency. My restraint." She had named the very things I once believed protected our marriage and turned them into tools for dismantling it. Rebecca paused the audio there. The click was tiny, but it seemed to echo. She let the room breathe for 3 seconds, maybe 4, just long enough for the weight to settle without appearing theatrical. Then she said, "Your Honor, this is not a wife describing fear. This is a wife describing strategy." Judge Monroe's face remained composed, but her eyes had sharpened. Daniel stood again, this time slower. He argued that people vent, that private conversations contain exaggeration, that stress makes people speak carelessly. Rebecca nodded as if she had expected every word. Then she asked for the next section to be played. The clerk pressed the key. Lauren's voice returned, lighter now, almost amused. "Once he moves to the guest room, I can say the separation already started emotionally. If he leaves the house, even better. Daniel says abandonment is not automatic, but optics matter. Men like Matthew always think being fair will save them. They do not understand that fair is. Not the same as smart. I felt the old ache rise then, not anger, not even shock anymore, but grief with clean edges. The kind that does not knock you down, just shows you exactly where the floor ends. Ashley's voice came in quieter. Are you sure you want to do it this way? For 1 second, the recording held a pause. In that pause, I remembered every Saturday morning at the farmer's market, every mortgage payment, every cabinet hinge tightened, while Lauren sat nearby, talking about her day. Then Lauren answered, I am sure. He is not a bad man. He is just easy to beat. The judge looked up. Ashley, sitting behind Lauren, covered her mouth with both hands. Lauren did not turn around. She stared forward, blinking too fast, the soft sadness gone from her face as if someone had wiped off a layer of paint. Rebecca stopped the audio again and asked that the transcript be entered as an exhibit. Daniel objected for the record, but his voice had lost its polish. The court admitted it. The phrase landed quietly, officially, permanently. Admitted. A simple word that changed the temperature of the room. Lauren had spent months shaping my silence into evidence against me. Now her own voice sat in the record, clear, dated, and impossible to smooth over with a cream coat and a tissue. I finally looked at her. Not with triumph. Not with hate. Just long enough for her to understand that I had heard everything long before the court did. After the recording ended, the courtroom did not explode. It settled. That was worse for Lauren. A loud room can protect a person because noise gives them somewhere to hide, but a quiet room leaves every expression exposed. Judge Monroe looked down at the transcript, then at Rebecca, then at Daniel Pierce, whose polished confidence had turned into the stiff posture of a man trying to hold a cracked vase together with both hands. Lauren sat motionless, her hands folded too tightly on the table, the tissue crumpled between her fingers. A few minutes earlier, she had looked like a woman waiting for sympathy. Now she looked like someone hearing the sound of a door closing from the wrong side. Rebecca did not press too hard. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. She knew the evidence had already done what shouting could never do. She simply guided the court through the timeline, calm and exact, connecting the August 17th recording to the messages Lauren had sent me afterward, the staged arguments, the notes from her attorney, the sudden changes in how she described our marriage to friends. Piece by piece, the story Lauren had built began to lose its shape. Not because Rebecca insulted her. Not because I finally raised my voice. Because the structure could not hold its own weight. Daniel tried to redirect, asking whether I had been emotionally distant, whether I had failed to communicate, whether my quiet nature had made Lauren feel abandoned. I answered each question with the truth and nothing extra. Yes, I was quiet. Yes, I avoided public conflict. Yes, I sometimes went to the garage instead of arguing in the kitchen. No, I did not do it to punish her. No, I did not use silence as a weapon. No, I did not leave the house. No, I did not threaten her future. I looked at Judge Monroe and said, I stayed because I thought patience was the adult thing to do. I stopped speaking because every word was being turned into something else. That sentence hung there longer than I expected. Even Daniel paused before moving on. When Ashley was called, she walked to the front like every step cost her something. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat with her shoulders rounded inward. Rebecca asked if the voice on the recording was hers. Ashley said yes. Rebecca asked if the conversation had been edited to change its meaning. Ashley swallowed and said no. Rebecca asked if Lauren had discussed using my calm demeanor to influence the divorce proceedings. Ashley looked toward Lauren once, then back at the table in front of her. Yes, she said. Her voice was small, but the microphone caught it. Lauren closed her eyes. That was the first moment I felt the ending arrive, not like victory, but like a long-held breath finally leaving a room. Judge Monroe made no dramatic speech. Real consequences rarely come wrapped in drama. She spoke in measured terms about credibility, documentation, and the courts. Concern with statements that appeared to show strategic misrepresentation. Temporary requests that had once seemed likely were narrowed. Claims that depended on Lauren's version of events were placed under scrutiny. The court ordered further review of financial disclosures, preserved my access to the house while the divorce proceeded, and denied the immediate restrictions Lauren had requested against me. It was not the entire end of the case, but it was the end of her control over the story. That mattered more than people think. Money can be divided. Furniture can be moved. Houses can be sold. But when someone takes your name and reshapes it in public, Getting the truth back feels like being allowed to breathe with both lungs again. When the hearing adjourned, chairs scraped softly against the floor. People stood. Papers slid into folders. The ordinary machinery of the courthouse resumed, indifferent to the private collapse it had just witnessed. Lauren remained seated for a moment, staring at the table as Daniel whispered to her. Ashley left without looking back. Rebecca placed one hand on my shoulder and said, "You did well." I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because all I had done was remain still while the truth finally moved. In the hallway, Lauren caught up to me near the tall windows overlooking the parking lot. Her face looked smaller without the performance around it. "Matthew," she said, and for the first time in months, my name did not sound like an accusation. I stopped, but did not turn fully toward her. She searched for words, and I could see how unfamiliar that was for her now, speaking without a prepared angle. "I did not mean for it to go this far," she said. The old me would have helped her soften that sentence. The old me would have offered a bridge, some careful phrase to make the silence less uncomfortable. Instead, I let it stand. Then I said, "You meant for it to go far enough to work." Her eyes filled, but I did not step closer. Not every tear asks for comfort. Some ask for the past to become negotiable. Mine was not. I walked out through the courthouse doors into a cold Ohio afternoon, the sky pale and low, the wind moving. Across the parking lot with the smell of rain in it. My car was parked near the edge of the lot, beside a bare tree shaking lightly in the breeze. I sat behind the wheel for a while before starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the same way my father taught me when I was 16. For years, I thought silence meant holding the peace. Then I thought it meant losing myself. That day, I learned it could mean something else. It could mean listening. It could mean remembering. It could mean refusing to hand someone the reaction they needed to finish the lie. I drove home on Interstate 270 at 65 miles per hour, past office parks, gas stations, and neighborhoods full of houses that looked peaceful from the road. Mine was still waiting for me, half full of memories and half full of boxes. I knew the divorce was not finished. I knew there would be more papers, more meetings, more hard conversations about what could be divided and what never should have been broken. But for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of the quiet waiting for me there. The quiet was mine again.